Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you present here in Dubai, and also to those of you who've joined online. My name is Yasmin Batliwala, and I'm the Chief Executive of Advocates for International Development, or A4ID. I have the honour of being the host of this event, together with my colleagues from CMS, Clifford Chance, Kirkland Ellis and Linklaters. These international law firms, together with A4ID, will be discussing how the law can unite, act and deliver the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. But firstly, I would like to thank you for joining us here today, for giving up your time, and in doing so, demonstrating that this is a cause which is of concern to you, one that is of interest to you, and one that you may want to get more involved in. Before you start, if you're joining us virtually, some quick practical points to help you get the most out of the session. This platform is interactive. The windows on your screen are resizable, and you can move them around on your desktop. There's a QR code on your console screen, which will allow you to send you your feedback. For those of you who are here in person, the QR code will be also on the front screen, but also on there, as you can see. This enables you to access the agenda and other materials. We'll be opening the session up for live Q&A later on, but please start submitting your questions and comments via the Q&A box as early as possible during the session. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can, and of course, if we can't and we don't have time, we will respond by email after the session, so you will get a response from us. If you have any technical issues, please click on the help widget at the bottom of your screen with some troubleshooting information. You can also request technical help over the Q&A box, and our technicians will pick up those and help you. Also, by way of housekeeping, there is no scheduled fire alarm expected today. So if you hear the fire alarm announcements, please evacuate the room immediately and follow the instructions. If for any reason you wish to exit the room at any point during the session, please use the far side doors, which are over there. And finally, please ensure that your mobiles and tablets are on silent. Now, this session will be focusing on the topic of just transition. After all, there is a reason why we're talking about a just transition, is there not? The reason why the Paris Agreement didn't simply talk about energy transitions or sustainability transitions, but of just transitions. And for us here today, this word is not merely one of semantics, it's not merely clever wordplay, it runs to the very heart of the legal profession, of concepts that underpin what many of you here today do on a daily basis as bastions of justice. It is a clear signal that the legal profession is already an integral part of the sustainability solution, whether it fully recognises it or not, I should add. Indeed, just transition at its core is a reminder that there are many roads to net zero, but not all of them are equal. No wonder then that the role of the law and of the lawyers is inextricably interlinked with our universal responsibility to create equitable pathways to a greener, more sustainable future for all. And this, at the end of the day, is what the UN Sustainable Development Goals agenda is all about. It's about creating a world where no one gets left behind in our attempts to build a fairer, more inclusive, more peaceful, more resilient, and more ecologically sound world in which we live. Today's discussions emerge in a year where unprecedented environmental catastrophes have occurred across the globe. As the UN aptly puts it, we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. Moreover, as we ponder the outcomes of the first ever global stocktake, it becomes glaringly apparent that our aspirations under the Paris Agreement demand heightened attention. The findings emphasise the imperative for nations to amplify their commitments to effectively combat the escalating climate crisis. But for those of us here today, this critical point in history is also an opportunity to recognise that we are capable. We are capable of changing the planet's trajectory and supporting a just transition. Accordingly, when we hear the COP presidency's vision to course correct at COP28, we understand that this involves more than just getting us back on the course of decarbonisation, but it's also about putting us on a pathway to justice. For A4ID, the recognition that lawyers are important stakeholders in issues beyond the courtroom and the boardroom is at the very heart of our Constitution. Since its inception, A4ID believed in the role of lawyers as agents of real, systemic, and meaningful change. This belief in lawyers is at the very heart of A4ID. Almost 20 years ago now, the catastrophic 2004 Asian tsunami highlighted just how little support was available to communities affected by climate disasters, with pro bono providing one plausible solution. In response, a network of lawyers banded together to support those affected, highlighting the power of lawyers in tackling the world's largest and most devastating crises. Thus, A4ID was born. We coordinate access to pro bono legal services from the world's leading law firms and corporates to hundreds of organisations around the globe at zero cost. Through facilitating access to justice, organisations have benefited from the unparalleled expertise of lawyers and thereby been better equipped to tackle pressing and complex issues such as climate change. Over the years, A4ID has supported a number of pro bono initiatives that have proactively worked on SDGs 7, 13, 14 and 15 in looking to protect the planet and its ecological resources. For example, in partnership with global law firms, A4ID has brokered commercial pro bono advice to organisations such as Energy for Impact, Solar Buddy and Green Energy Africa. We've brokered initiatives to safeguard natural assets and habitats, providing pro bono support to organisations such as the Virunga Foundation, seeking to protect Africa's oldest and most diverse national park, located in the Democratic Republic of Congo. More recently, we've expanded our pro bono expertise through A4ID's SDG Legal Initiative, building a network of law firms and legal professionals across the globe who are working collaboratively towards the SDG agenda, though both through pro bono contributions, but also in their wider dealings, such as in their business operations, in the advice they give to their clients, in the services and offerings, and in a whole host of other ways in which lawyers get involved. The SDG Legal Initiative is essential to anyone leading on or learning about the law and its interlinkages with sustainability. A wealth of information is available on the platform, together with inspiring case studies to show just what is possible. Indeed, it's also a hub for resource exchange, knowledge distribution, targeted pro bono action, and dialogue building. In fact, it is through the SDG Legal Initiative that we are here gathered today, and that we've been working to develop new pathways to green solutions and unearthing new ways of thinking about how the law connects with global energy transitions. After all, it's not just the race to net zero that we're in, but also the race to new laws, to new policies, to new regulations that are bound to emerge as countries across the globe push to realise their international commitments for combating climate change. As powerful advocates, lawyers will be key to this movement, whether it is in keeping abreast of new reporting requirements and regulations or in paving the way as champions of best practice in international supply chains, in climate finance arrangements, and even in marketing campaigns to mitigate the risks of greenwashing and virtue signalling. It is with this fervent foundational belief in the power of lawyers that we invite today's discussion on the role of lawyers in achieving a just transition. To reach the temperature targets under the Paris Agreement, lawyers will be central to the systemic energy transformation needed, transitioning economies away from traditional energy sources and towards clean energy. As advisors, advocates, policymakers, and implementers, lawyers come into play at every stage of the energy transition. The persuasiveness of climate change means the skills of lawyers will also be needed across a range of sectors. At the apex of regulatory framework, lawyers play a role in designing, creating solutions, sending clear policy signals to guide long-term decision-making, and strengthening climate governance, including climate accountability and the rule of law. At the inception of enterprise, lawyers will need to help investors to better assess climate risk and to redirect financial flows into renewable energy. And throughout a business's operations, lawyers will need to help increase transparency around supply chains, keep abreast of new reporting requirements, and ensure compliance with new regulations. Most importantly, lawyers are needed to ensure that all roads taken to reach net zero are just. The principle of just transition is yet another avatar of equity and justice in the international climate regime. It reminds us that the burdens of the energy transition, and indeed of climate change, do not fall on all equally. Disparities across states can be significant based on historical contributions to greenhouse gases, particular vulnerabilities to climate impacts, and reduced capacities to tackle climate change. Economies that are highly dependent on fossil fuels face a challenging road ahead. Countries may see existing inequalities made worse by energy transition, which brings its large-scale job losses, skills shortages, and energy insecurity. Determining which roads will yield equitable outcomes may not always be clear, but lawyers can help identify these pathways. In this exercise of pathfinding, the UN Sustainable Development Goals serve as a compass, helping us to ensure that 3 key features of just transition are observed. Firstly, we must ensure that harm from the transition is minimized. This means transitioning workforces carefully by providing decent work opportunities with full productive employment under SDG 8. SDG 15 compels us to mitigate adverse impacts of development on the natural environment and implicitly any negative effects on the rights of associated local and indigenous communities. SDG 7 reminds us that energy should not just be cleaner, but also affordable and accessible to all, directly invoking the principle of equity. Secondly, we must ensure that the raft of benefits the energy transition offers are fully realised, particularly by those with development needs. For instance, countries should be able to enjoy the co-benefits of sustainable transport systems and urbanisation under SDG 11, such as better air quality and reduced mortality. SDG 9 promotes sustainable industrialisation. Both should raise the GDP as well as human well-being. Finally, a just transition means observing fair and inclusive processes in accordance with the rule of law. This means implementing measures to empower and promote social, economic and political inclusion under SDG 10. SDG 16 helps us to comply with the rule of law, requiring access to justice, widespread participation, as well as public access to information. In many ways, the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and A4ID all share the same North Star. That guiding light is the principle of partnership and collaboration across countries, sectors, and peoples. Climate responsibilities are not singular in nature, nor can we hope to achieve the SDGs alone. A4ID therefore believes that in the context of just transition, we must all work in partnership under the principles of SDG 17 to fast-track energy transitions, grow green economies, and build healthier environments, improving the lives of billions around the world. I conclude then with a call to action, a request for you all to look at today's event as a chance to move beyond viewing lawyers as mere witnesses to COP28, but as thought leaders, critical sounding boards for clients, and key implementers of Paris targets. At this year's COP, we hope that this panel event brings you new ideas and encourages lateral thinking in your own organisations for how to get involved as we continue to voice our call to lawyers to shepherd us through the world's decarbonisation journey. I invite you to actively engage with us as partners and to proactively consider how you can use your platform, your position, your expertise, no matter where you are positioned in the marketplace. It's an opportunity, your opportunity, so take it. Thank you. So, to help us on this journey, I'm delighted to welcome Manir Hassan, who is the chair of our first panel and the head of energy and climate change at CMS. The title of the first panel is Energy Transition. Over to you.
Okay, quick mic check as well. Perfect. Well, thank you for that very full summary and setting out all of the different elements of the SDGs that we'll hopefully now touch on. I think the energy side, and we have a very esteemed panel here who can talk to it. On the energy side, it feels like energy has been a sort of early mover in this debate. Certainly the electricity sector where I've worked for the last 25 odd years has been seen as a sort of low-hanging fruit almost, the first place to really kind of start experimenting with ways in which how we can achieve a transition. And the energy transition, for those who haven't heard about it before, is basically a sort of general term that more or less describes how do we transition from something that's very heavy on fossil fuel use to something that is more or less sort of transition away from fossil fuels as a dominant fuel source in the energy sector. And with that, I'd like to sort of introduce my fabulous panel we've got here. So we've got Paul Barker, who's a partner at Kirkland Ellis in San Francisco, Claire Burgess from Clifford Chance in London, and Tanya Gossain from the World Bank, presumably Washington.
I just moved to Abu Dhabi last month.
Okay. All right, but World Bank in Washington, but Tanya, who is now in Abu Dhabi. So we have different perspectives here, and I thought maybe starting with the broadest question I could ask from all of this, and given the World Bank's role in influencing and implementing policies, and we've heard about sort of the importance of lawyers in sort of effectively sort of driving this debate. How does the World Bank kind of go about this? What does your day look like in terms of the energy transition and sort of being an agent for change in that process as well?
Yeah. First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invite. Very excited to be here. So, for those of you who don't know the World Bank is an international organization. We help countries in more than 190. We have governments in more than 190 countries to reduce poverty, and very recently our mission has shifted to reduce poverty on a livable planet, to make sure that it's consistent with some of the goals that Yasmin mentioned in her introductory remarks. So I'm part of a global team that advises countries on how to facilitate investment, being domestic or foreign alike. And when we look at investment, we're trying to see how to promote, how to integrate priorities such as achieving net zero, climate action within these priorities in the different governments. At the start of his mandate, our president recently not only talked about ending poverty on a livable planet, but we specifically tackled the issue of energy by talking about just energy for all. So what we're trying to do is really to achieve these goals of not only shifting towards more green, environmentally friendly energy sector, but of course, and also going beyond energy, but also making sure that everybody has access. So it's an inclusive process. It's a process that doesn't leave anybody behind. Our challenge is really that we cater to clients and client governments of different development levels and different capacity levels. So if we're looking at the energy sector, for instance, developing countries face a triple penalty. When you see what kind of challenges they have and how do we help them tackle that? They often pay more for electricity. Electricity is more expensive in these countries. They have, unfortunately, very often no access to clean energy projects because of the risk that is imposed with the environment there. And then also they are locked in fossil fuel dependency. So it really kind of like puts them in a poverty trap where it's very hard for them to transition to clean energy and to promote these goals, to achieve these goals that we're talking about today. The bank helps these governments through several ways. So we have, first of all, through financing, but also through advisory support. I'm part of the team that does the advisory support, but of course we work very closely together to make sure we give a multifaceted support to our clients. So when it comes to financing, the discussion really revolves around how can we make climate financing more equitable, especially in developing countries and in emerging countries. If you're thinking about a country like Mali, and then you go, I've worked in Africa, you go and you talk to them about energy transition, they have bigger issues to deal with, but you need to integrate the green. We try to work as much as possible to integrate the green element into the dialogue that we have with them. Also, in advanced economies, you have robust business environments and investment climates, so it's much easier to attract investors. The risks are lesser, but in developing countries, the risks pose a big challenge. Our team of advisors come in to try to see how to put in place the policies and the strategies. And when I talk about policies, we're talking broadly about laws, regulation, the legal instruments, but also the institutional setups. And we also use digital tools to try to see how do we reduce the risk for these investors to come in to the country and then support the government in its transition to clean energy. So we're ramping up our advisory support on this. And any advisory support should be well informed. We developed recently a diagnostic tool on what it takes to promote a green investment climate in these countries. So we look at policy barriers and regulatory barriers that could prevent investors from coming in, foreign investors to invest in green sectors. But also, what are the barriers to transition incumbents in the country, make their performance more environmentally friendly? I just came back an hour ago from Riyadh, where we're supporting the Saudi government in this green transition, and we're conducting exactly this type of advisory work to unlock the green metal manufacturing in the country. So that's just one example of our support.
Example. And I guess, sort of what you're touching on there is that it's never just a straightforward answer to the question of, sort of how to do these sorts of things. You have to fix many, many problems.
Yeah.
And maybe, Claire, turning to the work that you've been doing, and you were discussing this when we were preparing for the session around, how mechanisms can be designed effectively to facilitate new technologies being implemented in countries. And I know that Clifford Chance has been working on those sorts of mechanisms in Spain and other countries. Maybe you could say a little bit about those, which I guess interrelates a little bit with what Tanya was saying about the legal frameworks being in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, and hello everyone. I think there's way more than two, but let me pick up on two different types of mechanisms that we might be talking about. So one mechanism close to my heart is a mechanism around blended finance. I'm going to have to stop moving my face. So on blended finance, I think we're seeing already, and we're seeing an increased acceleration of the need for development finance institutions in particular to come up with new ways of supporting projects, particularly in different jurisdictions, to crowd in other investment. Okay. And I think there's a lot of legal work involved in creating those mechanisms, working with in-house teams in the financial institutions to sell those internally and make sure everyone understands what they're getting into. We had some great examples actually with MEGA on what was first a hospital in Turkey, Elazig, and since Egyptian Solar, Benban, where MEGA and EBRD joined together to effectively provide support and subordinated support to crowd in international investments into the markets. And those mechanisms we've seen repeated with, EIB and other development banks, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, around the world. I'm sure people have examples of other of those. So that's an area where it can take some time, particularly when you're doing the first project. There's some patience involved, and you need some creativity from all those around the table to try and meet the needs of the parties who are doing something for the first time. So creativity, not always the word associated with lawyers, but I like to think that we've got plenty of that. And so that's one mechanism. The other mechanism is really new regimes, new mechanisms, new whole supply chains for some of the new technologies in the energy transition. And to give you an example, you mentioned green metals in Saudi. I'm currently working on the green steel transaction in Sweden that's been talked about. The supply chain for green steel is not entirely clear. That the offtake for that isn't clear. There's not an established price. So there's a team, and actually they've been around COP this year doing a lot of work, getting off-takers together in terms of creating the offtake. But it's not at the moment the traditional project finance tick box that you'd expect. We haven't got a full offtake. We haven't got all of these things that you'd look for. And so both the lawyers and also the other parties, the sponsors, the financiers, need to maybe stretch their goals a little bit on that. And we talked about the hydrogen transaction in Spain and France. In fact, it's called HyDeal, where that sort of collaboration approach was certainly put to the test. We had over 50 participants in the HyDeal Europe programme, the goal of which was to design sort of the end of a hydrogen system. So we're starting here with not enough electrolyzers and no sort of demand for hydrogen. What would that look like if we got to the end and we got to a position when it was 1 or 2 euros per kilogram of hydrogen? How do we get there? What are the necessary things that need to be in place? And we immediately, the group sort of went to scale. And so, and that sort of pricing point is really important, coming back to the just transition elements. We must be able to offer the world solutions that don't just put a lot of expense on developing countries in particular, but frankly, in every country there's this problem around cost of energy. So that programme to collaborate amongst the 50 participants, everyone bringing their own diverse skill sets, and that sort of investment, if you like, in kind of the future of what the energy transition will look like, I think is something we're seeing more and more. I'm sure you are too. Yeah, no, it's, I think it's a fantastically kind of exciting time. But 25 years ago, we didn't want excitement. We wanted stability, because stability is what brought investment into markets. And now everybody's excited, but excitement, of course, comes with its own problems. And I guess to some extent we have to bring everyone with us and say that this is a changing landscape, you're going to have to stretch with it, and that's part of it. Maybe I can bring you in, Paul, point. I guess one of the reasons why banks and other people are putting money into the sorts of projects Claire was talking about is that they want to be involved in climate-related finance, and that's great. But is it very clear for them to understand what is climate-related finance, and are the ways in which they can get
sort of credit for that clear, or are they walking a bit of a tightrope here in terms of knowing what counts and what doesn't count? What are the drivers for the banking community in this, do you think?
Well, there's huge demand for private capital to be invested in energy transition, and despite the great work of the development banks, the public sector, we're looking at something like a shortfall of several trillion at least dollars a year, which will have to be sourced from the private sector. So we need banks. We also today this week are seeing a concerted effort to mobilise private capital through investment funds. So the Altera fund that was launched by UAE with TPG and Brookfield and BlackRock is an example, I think, of the trend that we're seeing of mainstream finance, private markets, and also banks committing to climate and energy transition investment. And they are, I think, becoming more, the investors and other stakeholders are becoming more sophisticated and more rigorous in understanding what is required. So they're not just focused on returns, but they're also focused on climate impact and mitigation of greenwashing risk. So as I say, this week, I think the private funds piece and also the carbon markets piece, carbon finance, using carbon projects, carbon credits to finance either nature-based solutions or tech-based solutions. We see real concerted effort there from the private sector to sort of funnel financing through. But at the same time, there is this question about what that balance between ambition and integrity. And taking a step back, I think what we've seen, and we also were talking about this earlier, the past few years, a couple of key trends. It's an increasingly complex legal landscape when it comes to energy transition and climate investing for the private sector. We have initially moved, we are clearly moving from a position of voluntary market-led initiatives to mandatory regulation now. So I think TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, that's, I think, a prime example of how an initiative that was set up back at COP28, that's the genesis, a solution by the market for the market, has now transitioned into being the foundation for regulation, mandatory climate-related disclosure requirements in Asia, in Europe, and indeed even in the US. It's on the basis of the SEC's proposed climate rule to an extent. So that, I think, is an important trend that investors, private investors, whether it be banks, whether it be funds or investors in the carbon markets, that is a very important trend. And then, of course, in parallel, addressing the market integrity and greenwashing point, the rise of litigation related to climate claims, because we've had this proliferation of corporate climate claims, whether it be carbon neutrality, net zero type claims, and what we're seeing now in Europe, in Asia, and in the US is litigation relating to these claims. Corporates that are claiming to be carbon neutral, that are claiming to be low carbon, to be sustainable, have been the subject of litigation. So I think there's an increasing level of awareness of the level of rigor that has to go into the claims that are made, to take us back to the example of the private funds, in private fund strategies, I think the role of lawyers really is one of the key roles, is that integrating that focus on integrity and looking very clearly at the strategy in the case of energy transition, defining precisely what it is. In Europe, there's quite emerging, a relatively clear regulation emerging. In the US and other jurisdictions, there's still an absence of regulation, and it is for market participants to clearly articulate what it is. But taking the opportunity to define these important features of an investment strategy, understanding what it is, quantifying, being able to quantify and report on impact, and this can be tied to SDGs, more in the case of climate and transition funds, quite frequently emissions reductions, avoided emissions, but getting that rigor, understanding that the methodologies and reporting and assurance has to be in place, and the challenges, of course, because but certainly when it comes to emissions and GHG data, data quality and data availability is incredibly challenging. So the role of a lawyer, I think, in this context is very nuanced, because you're integrating the market and the legal advice and also the technical advice on GHG accounting and potentially climate science and SDGs as well. And that, it's really about taking a much broader lens than I think traditionally, as you were saying, when things were simpler. Now it's taking into account of multiple stakeholders, what investors want, the fact that investors in different parts of the world might want different things, regulation in different parts of the world the same, and other stakeholders too. But finding a way to integrate all of those imperatives into the investment process in what is a very dynamic and rapidly evolving regulatory and market space.
Yeah. Most of the energy assets that we would advise on are typically around 30-year assets, and yet we're trying to make decisions on investments when rules are changing year on year. That's the kind of challenge that we're having to kind of guide our clients through. There should be a roving mic, I'm told, at this point, magically appearing somewhere in the middle of the room. And for those who are online, when I look at my phone, it's not because I've lost interest, it's because I'm told that's where the questions will appear. So I may look at my phone as well. But in the meantime, I'm going to invite people in the audience here first.
Whilst we're waiting for a question, can I just pick up on something?
Yes, please do, Claire, while someone thinks of a question.
Think of a really good question. Yeah. It was just on the standards and the move from voluntary standards into regulation. And it's a point that we thought about a lot in the capital markets context. I actually spent a long time in my career doing capital markets and green bonds. And that has moved from being a very market-led area to being now in Europe at least, a sort of regulatory green bond standard. And I think some people would welcome that, but some people are quite worried about it from the same token, because there is a question, and I battle with this question, there is this question that if you set the bar too high for some things, whether it's through regulation or just through expectations, then you leave behind a lot of institutions that would want to do something but may not be ready to commit, to what we'd call dark green type behaviours. And whilst we can sort of judge them for that, also to get the real change in the world, which is what frankly everyone wants. We don't want more labelled products. We want to see that impact into the world. Maybe you don't want to deter them from doing that, and it's quite an interesting topic. We are frankly worried in Europe that the new standards will reduce the amount of labelled green bonds, and the success of those green bonds hasn't really been the money that it's funneled to green projects. It's been the increasing awareness of green finance, sustainable finance, the importance of having a goal, the importance of investing in sustainable investments and sort of stepping outside. So, there is a question about whether the regulation
be a bit more relaxed in this transition period than maybe we would otherwise be with these sorts of rules.
Maybe, but I think particularly one of the reasons regulation comes in is because there were some weak examples, and I would say actually it's for the lawyers and for the investment bankers to, if you're going to self-regulate, properly self-regulate, push your clients, like you were saying, encourage your clients to do more and be more ambitious in their targets. Actually, maybe then you avoid the regulation and we continue to grow the market.
Yeah, I don't want to go beyond my moderation role, but maybe just to add a comment as well, which is I also think we should be quite fixated on having rules that are needed, because there seem to be a lot of rules, and it's not always clear that all of them are achieving progress towards what we want to achieve. So there's a bit of a over-regulation point that might be also in there.
And just briefly on I would just, I think, echo that comment and compare somewhat with the US, because despite the accent, I'm based on the other side of the pond. And there is culturally more of a resistance to the kind of detailed prescriptive rules that you see in Europe with SFDR. And on sustainable finance, I think what you're seeing is more of the market-led approach you're describing. So, to take the example of sustainability-linked loans, there are there is the voluntary guidance, the sustainability-linked loan principles, and typically I think they are being adopted by banks, not necessarily incorporated into the documentation, but it's an example of how the market is adapting, I think, and using those voluntary standards in the absence of guidance, in the absence of regulation. And that's, I think there are some markets, and maybe we'll come on to the sort of voluntary carbon markets, where regulation appears to be the direction of travel, but sustainable finance in the US for now has taken a different path to Europe.
Yeah. So I can see that people have had time to think of some really kind of juicy questions here, so we're going to start here.
Thanks. Hi, Imran here from PwC. In regards to what you just said about sustainability linked loans, sustainability linked bonds, when I looked at them and I first read about them, I thought initially that it was a great idea, that you have a loan, it has an interest rate of X, but if you fall out of the parameters of being sustainable, the interest rate goes up. But then I thought for a second time, and I said, well, that's a little bit sort of perverted, because a lender wants a return. He wants to maximize his return for his investors. That's one of his primary goals. And so the company that's borrowed the money and for whatever reason has now fallen foul and now has lost that benefit of the lower cost of debt, it seems like the investor may be okay, but the company sort of is sort of being punished on one hand, but the benefits will go to somebody else, but because the loan will become non-eligible for that green fund. It will go to somebody else's fund who's conventional, and they'll benefit from the increased interest. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that construct and whether that's sort of version one, and there's maybe some further innovation to come in that to make it a little bit less, bring the incentive in line with the actual purpose.
There's a lot of thoughts. I don't know. There's probably about an hour on this, but I can do a short version if you want.
You've got a minute to go back on an hour's worth of content. How do you feel about that?
It's fine. I mean, I think for one, that point and the sort of perverse incentive, and actually even worse than that, sort of the bad press of getting paid when someone's failing on sustainability standards was a point noted by the banks. And in many cases, some of the structures don't have the money going to the banks. They have the money going to you must invest that difference into a sustainable project, for example, or some of them had charity donations. There were similar sort of outcomes for that. In bonds, the money tends to go to the bondholders. I think there's the more important thing about the product is compared to a purpose driven, so a green or a social loan or bond, where the proceeds goes to something particular. The sustainability link looks across the whole business, and so it can be very useful for reorienting a business around new goals. And I think it's a bit to the point, you can kick a lot of holes in those products, but in fact what they're doing is making companies create targets, which is driving change. And sometimes, to get the company to give that target, not easy. Takes a lot of work, particularly with the bankers. So, they are producing value, I think, globally in terms of change.
Very good question, though. I hadn't heard that issue before, so I was kind of...
No, I just wanted to say, even within the bank, we just, I know it's different, but like within the bank, we came up with an innovative financing mechanism recently, and we just did it in Uruguay and Gabon, where we linked the loans' interest rates with environmental targets. So it rewards the countries that can achieve certain environmental goals. So let's say, I don't know, in Gabon, it was related to deforestation. So if it was a commitment to make sure that, they maintain a certain level, then they get credit that they can use towards their interest rates that they pay to the bank. So it's somewhat of it's not mandatory because it becomes a challenge, and I think it's the same in the private sector, where you need to make sure that you're catering to the ones with less capacity and the ones that cannot comply. So it has become kind of a reward mechanism rather than making it mandatory.
Or whether you believe in carrots or sticks, I guess, in this world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have the microphone. Thank you all for your really interesting contribution. My name is Nigel Fleming. I'm here on behalf of the British Institute of International and Comparative Law. And you're talking about finance. And the question I wanted to ask you, remembering that lawyers are basically servants of clients, is whether the mood has changed, whether over the last 4 or 5 years, clients are asking you to produce greener outcomes rather than you referring to what regulation might be on the horizon. Has the mood in the industry changed?
And can you give an example of how a client might ask a lawyer to produce a greener outcome?
How a client might ask a lawyer...
to produce a greener outcome for them?
No, I was thinking, Milia, you've been in the electricity business for, you said decades.
25 years, yes.
Most of the people I've worked with over the years, the commercial clients have been interested in a commercial outcome, either a profit or defending themselves from litigation or the risk of litigation. As we move closer and closer to the precipice of climate disaster, people I'm talking to are asking me to help them help the world. And that's a different approach in the last 5 years. It's certainly different from Glasgow 2 years ago. I'm talking to people and they want to, even though they're in it for money, in it for profit, they want to help. And are you hearing the same thing, is what I'm asking?
Yeah, interesting question. I have some thoughts about this. Shall I offer it to the panel?
Yeah, I mean, what we have been encouraging, because I don't work with the private sector clients, but what we have been encouraging, and there comes the role of lawyers as the connector and an honest advice broker for these clients, is to try to integrate some of these good practices into their production. So, examples could be, first of all, upstream, there's a role for lawyers to kind of like with not only with the World Bank, with like donors and multilaterals to push and promote this kind of projects like blended finance, but also to instigate behavioral changes with the clients, like with the private sector. So by adopting clean technology, I mean, today I think the private sector cannot afford, in many sectors, they cannot afford anymore not to maintain a minimum standard. I mean, just this past month, the EU CBAM, like the carbon border adjustment mechanism kicked in. If you are a firm in the EU and you want to import, for now it's applicable to steel, electricity, aluminum, and then a few others, you have to be able to show that they have less impact. They had less impact in their production on the climate. So it will create more barriers for to connect to global value chains, and it's not only a goal of achieving more to address like climate change. It also has a business benefit to these clients, and there are a number of steps that they can take. So it's eco certifications, like obtaining eco certifications for supply chains. There are a number of steps that lawyers can support the private sector in working towards these goals. Yeah. But I think you bring up a very good point, but I think it's not only related to climate change. It is becoming it has a dual objective for them of, creating more business opportunities, and then also at the same time, targeting climate change.
Yeah. It's a good question, and I think I only have a one-word answer to it, which is yes. Yeah, so lots.
Yes, also yes.
I want to take one question from the online. There are quite a few questions came through, but this one I thought was quite interesting. Has anyone done any assessment of the correlation between the growing green regulatory standards that are being introduced and the amount of investment that they drive into the green sector?
Probably McKinsey.
Yeah, maybe there was a McKinsey report. Okay. Probably one to Google rather than, yeah, no, I can imagine there has been that kind of assessment done, but it's kind of a good question.
Yeah, causation is always a difficult reference point, but I mean, you know, someone asked me a couple of days ago how important are the NDCs for driving change, and actually the response was, well, I think the NDCs drive countries to implement new programs and regulation, which then provides the right environment for investment or shifts investment, as Paul knew very well, into different areas, which then increases the investment into green. So clearly they're not having no effect, they're having a big effect, and certain programs like, you know, the IRA, for example, is having a huge, huge effect.
With that, maybe we should hand over to our next panel, which Roger will be chairing. Is that right?
So many questions.
Sorry?
There is another question.
Oh, we have one more question. Time for one more question. I'm being too premature. Sorry, Roger.
Hi.
We have a 5-minute break, and then we have the second panel. Yes, sir, of course.
Hi, I had a question which I wanted to take back to the role of the legal profession, and this is probably more directed to law firms, but I wanted to just gauge the opinion of the panels if you think that law firms are going to get to a place where you sort of refuse a client or transaction based on some sort of ESG criteria like a net zero or maybe a human rights implication, considering the convergence of those issues now. And this is sort of in the context of different legal regulatory bodies or associations or bars issuing expectations, which are now soft but might harden. And also in the context of certain clients, perhaps FIs particularly, who will have criteria for onboarding or like their empanelment, where they consider the ESG and sustainability commitments because of their own commitments in that chain. Similar to maybe how you'll have to do clearances now for reputational or conflict issues.
Anyone want to take that?
Happy to, but do you want to take that? Yeah, it's already... Eureen's trying to take my thunder. Go on, Eureen.
Well, I'm happy to take that, and I was going to ask a question, but I'll take that because it's a tricky one. So my name is Jeroen Ouwehand, and I'm a partner of Claire's and of Rogers, and we created a policy about 3 years ago, exactly what you're talking about, client acceptance policy around particularly climate. Of course, we had lots of policies around reputational issues, around human rights, etc., but this was really specifically around climate.
And maybe just to add that I know Clifford Chance and some of the big firms were early movers, but the Law Society England and Wales has published guidance that requires pretty much, not requires it, it's guidance, but you know, to the extent that guidance requires anything, it requires, it suggests to people that they should have processes in place that matter openly.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, that's a little bit, I don't know what you say, our fault or our doing, because they called us when we had the policy and said, "Can you help us?"
I know you were early,
but it's also had some. You know, it leads. It's not an easy discussion because you know, where do you have the data? Do you have the information to make the right decisions? We sometimes, frankly, piggyback on analysis done by some of the big FIs or banks. How do they do the analysis, and we can ride that way because we don't always have the tools to make those decisions.
Yeah,
but
it's not requiring a particular outcome. It's just requiring people to pause and think. That's what it is. But it's there. I think that means that we are at time. We have a 5-minute break for those people on online. Just stay online. We'll be back on 5 minutes, and then we'll have the next panel, which will open the debate out to a more broader consideration on the just transition. Thank you very much. And thank you to the panelists.
Very well said.
I'm delighted now to welcome Roger Lees, who's going to chair the second panel. The important thing about Roger, in terms of his role, is that he's chair of the board of trustees at A4ID, and then he also does something at Clifford Chance, which I believe is being partner there. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Yasmin, and welcome again to everybody here. Thanks for turning up. It's not the easiest place to find. So we're on to the sort of second part, so I'll quickly introduce our panel, although I'll then leave them to say a bit more about themselves in due course. So we've got Charlie Dolphin here from CMS, Professor Louis Franceschi of the Commonwealth, and Mahmoud Sharawi of HSA Group. Yeah, I didn't miss you on the end. And Vanessa Harvard-Williams, that's because of the different orders here. So Vanessa Harvard-Williams of Linklaters, and actually we realised that we started as our respective firms in the same year in 1988, would you believe it? And both continued our association up to this date. It's quite incredible, I think. So we're really sort of going to pick up and widen the discussion now and look at how the legal sector can support a just transition for the benefit of societies. What I'd like, we've got a mixture here of different perspectives on that. What I would like to do, though, is start with you, Charlie. And I'd like you to tell us something about how you developed and used your skills in transition work and what this has taught you about the role of the legal sector. But start by saying a little bit about your practice and how you got to be where you are.
Sure, thanks Roger. So hi everyone, my name's Charlie Dolphin. I am a partner with CMS based in Muscat, Oman. I'm principally in the energy and infrastructure team. I'm working primarily on public procurement. So at the moment we're working on procuring 3 gigawatts of renewable energy power in Saudi Arabia. We've got about just over 1 gigawatt of power procurement going on, renewable energy power procurement going on in Oman, and 400 megawatts in Azerbaijan, which is obviously a bit outside the jurisdiction. So I came to the region over 10 years ago now, and my first procurement project was a gas-fired independent power project. And so sort of cut my teeth on not clean energy. And it wasn't until 2018 that we actually started to do work on renewable energy in the region. But it's now been a huge upward curve where we do nothing but renewable energy procurement. And we've taken all those skills that we developed on gas-fired IPPs and now apply them for clean energy for public procurement really across the whole region. And I think there's a lot of transferable skills for lawyers who may have grown up outside of the clean energy practice to sort of come now in all jurisdictions across the world really, to sort of take those learnings that they had from gas-fired, from oil and gas, and really look at how they can apply those skills to create a just transition and to transition away from fossil fuels and into clean energy. I mean, a number of my colleagues in the region obviously have spent 10, 15, 20 years doing oil and gas. They're not nervous about their jobs, luckily. But I think what they are looking at is, well, what can we now do to contribute? And one of the major sort of buzzwords, particularly around this COP28, but it's been in the region for a couple of years now, is green hydrogen. And green hydrogen is going to be not a project that sort of lawyers who have principally done renewable energy will actually be hugely involved in. It's an oil and gas project that is now clean, and we need those skills from oil and gas lawyers to come and work on them. Other thing I think is really important as well is, and it was mentioned earlier in the previous panel, is that lawyers can act as conveners. We have clients across all sectors and across all industries, and we can marry them up. We can marry oil and gas clients who are looking to transition with renewable energy developers who are looking for projects to invest in. So I think that's a really important point. And then I think sort of my third aspect is to look at is lawyers and how law firms themselves are implementing ESG. I think it's much bigger in other jurisdictions, UK, US, EU. It's a little harder to do here for a variety of reasons, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to do it, and we shouldn't be learning from colleagues in offices back in EU, UK, US, Asia, to take what they're doing to try and work out how we can apply those ESG principles into jurisdictions that don't necessarily do a lot of it now. But I think there also has to be a bit of buy-in from clients here in this region as well to sort of say, well, how are we going to procure our legal services? Do we want to be focused on just price, or can we look at what ESG responsibility law firms, particularly in the region, are taking, and look at that as a weighting factor in awarding legal services?
Thanks very much. And actually, you sort of gave an answer that sort of also addressed a little bit the question we had from our friend from Bickle, who actually, I was just going to point to him and he's just moving. But anyway, he asked about that question as, are we seeing more requests from clients and, about our work? And actually, I was going to just add to some point is we need that. We had some examples from the previous panel to that, and I'd take the opportunity just to add one that we certainly see quite a lot of now, which is that for panel pictures and so forth, the clients will often now ask us to give them information across a range of ESG issues. So yeah, very much climate change is there. Quite often asked to go into what are our own emissions, do we have our own net zero targets and things like that, and then on top of that quite often asking around EDI and other issues as well. But the climate change one's a really interesting one because of course for many of our clients the emissions of the law firm that works with them will actually go into their own calculations. So they're getting to a point where they need to know what our emissions are, and they actually need to be able to show, perhaps as a legal department, even if not now, looking in a couple of years' time, one of the things they'll be looking at is, can we show that we're procuring services that are lowering our emissions that we're having to report each year on and show a reduction. Now, at the end of the day, are the law firm emissions themselves the biggest number in there? Of course not. But we're certainly seeing that, and I think that sort of driver is there, and actually, I do think leads to quite a good, hopefully virtuous circle between law firms and their clients. And with that, that's a bit of a segue really into being able to turn now to you, Mahmoud, and to give the perspective from the GC position. So if I could hand over to you, and very much, I think I'd very much like to know a bit more about how you got to your position within HSA, your journey, and then a bit about the business and then what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Actually, it's my pleasure to attend with you today. It's very important to tackle this important matter about this topic related to SDG and United Nations in general. I need to introduce myself. Firstly, my name is Mahmoud Sha'arawi. I'm the General Counsel and Compliance Chief Officer for HSA Group. HSA Group, in brief, it's a Yemeni-based company which have started 85 years back. We are specialized in FMCG. We started in trading and then we started manufacturing in the 70s. Now we have more than 65 companies based in Yemen with 18,500 employees working in oil, in ghee, in sugar, in cement, in pharmaceutical matters, in activities, in services. We have almost 60% of the Yemeni economy. We are controlling it. Yes, 60%. That's a real number.
Wow.
We are generating almost $3.5 billion from Yemen. The whole group, HSA Group, is 35,000 employees. We are working in UK, Malaysia, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in UAE, and in some African countries, and definitely in Yemen. The whole group is generating around $16 billion, again in same activities, but in a wider scope. We are exporting for more than 80 countries worldwide. So we have partnership with most of the multinationals. We have the standards. We had a strategic development starting 2018. We have hired the best class people, each in his profession. So we have the best HR, we have the best CFO, and the same for the legal and compliance. Now, concerning what we had the last 2 years, we had a partnership with the IFC. We had an agreement with IFC as part of the World Bank and definitely part of the UN. where they had some rules and regulations that we should follow. That's where from we started to the SDG. So we had main sustainable development. We have 4 priority areas where we are focusing on. First of it is protecting the operating environment by having an HSE team, a very dedicated HSE team with the best class and the latest policies and regulations related to HSE. Same for training for our employees, how they maintain safety, how they even teach other employees how to be safe environment in working using all these machines and dangerous environment. We are unlocking the long-term potential for next generation by having education, by having a dedicated academy, technical academy, legal academy, and compliance academy, teaching people what's exactly needed from them. That's why we are elevating the knowledge of the Yemeni people in Yemen, and definitely in all regions that we are working in, like the Egyptian environment as well, and society. We are delivering innovative products that meet high standards of quality using the best R&D. We have a full dedicated R&D team. High quality raw materials, exporting mainly from Europe, and best-in-class equipment that we have in our products. Acting responsibility, ethically, and with accountability. We have a CSR team as well. We have a charity association, which is focusing totally on the Yemeni wealth and how to trying to develop the Yemeni people. As you know, since 2015, a war have enacted in Yemen, and Yemen have been divided between north and south. They have 2 governments, they have 2 central banks, they have 2 presidents. The all ministries are duplicated. Even they have 2 currencies, so it's not an easy to work in, definitely. And we are working all around the region, all around Yemen. So we have factories in the north and we have in the south. We are even exporting out of Yemen. So it's very hard to work in, but we have used to, and as I said, having controlling 60% make it much easier. Now, concerning the SDGs, if we will focus on what exactly we are focusing on, for SDG 2, for example, the zero hunger, we are contributing a lot as we are focusing on FMCG, like oil and ghee and biscuits. During the war, I think HSA had a really contribution, a huge contribution in sustaining people during the war and after that. It starts in 2015, and using the products of HSA, like the sugar, like the flour, like other strategic products, it have really made a lot of sustainability in Yemen. SDG 4, the quality education, we have Al Said Academy, which is almost for free for Yemeni people, trying to, as I said, elevating the education standards for Yemeni people and outside Yemen. Even the support for outside education, like people to be educated in UK or in Egypt or other countries, trying to have more skilled people. Yemeni people, by the way, by nature are very smart. They need only to be pushed and to be well educated. The results are really amazing from them. SDG 6, the clean water and sanitation. We have in most of, in all our factories actually, we have water treatment. We have the sewage for the industrial matters are really well treated with a high best-in-class treatment. For the environment, it's very important for us, and we are following the best standards in that in cooperation with IFC. SDG 9, the industry, innovation, and infrastructure. We are using clean energy in a lot of our factories. We have a lot of solar panels that we are relying on concerning the energy feeding in our factories. This is for 2 reasons. Actually, first of all, we need to meet the criteria related to the IFC. In addition to that, there is no electricity in Yemen. Simple as that. It's not easy. You don't have a grid related to electricity, so you should have your own electricity if you can. So we are using the solar one. SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, where we are really contributing in that, trying as well learning the people of Yemen how to use in a wise way the products that we are selling in Yemen. For the role of the lawyers, as we have I have 44 lawyers in Yemen, yes, and 10 working in compliance, and around 68 compliance ambassadors. All of them are in Yemen. So we have a huge role how we can educate people how to exactly implement the SDG rules related to the UN. So we are maintaining and promoting awareness of the complex and shifting regulatory landscape. It's very crucial for major manufacturers like HSA Group, actually. We are working with procurement team so to ensure that the raw materials are sourced sustainability. Engaging with on-ground HSE professionals. We have a dedicated team, as I told you, related to HSE to create optimal workplace condition. And we are implementing a rigorous quality assurance process to ensure that HSA Group retains its reputation for high product standards.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, that's fascinating. I think I'd say actually just two things, two observations I had actually listening to you. I think one, quite often it's said that, you know, doing the right thing is something you can only do when you're in a good situation and an easy situation. So to hear about you and your business doing that in some of the most difficult situation on you know, the globe at the moment, and that you see that and your business sees that as crucial to success.
Correct.
I think it's a really, you know, crucial point. You know, in what you're doing there, and then secondly, you know, there's quite a lot of discussion about what we mean by just transition, of course. Although I was in one session yesterday where they skipped over and said, "Well, we all know what it means, so let's get on to how we're going to finance it." But I did bring the conversation back a little bit and say, you know, it still isn't straightforward because in the end, you know, a just transition, you know, encompasses so much, and it's not just about, you know, the jobs of the people who are working in the coal mines. It's what you were just talking about there. It's about, you know, about justice and fairness within and between countries, and everything you spoke about. And I thought, Yasmin, I thought your piece was excellent of really tying the SDGs into this. And as you said, that's been there really from day one, but I don't think it's been brought out enough, and I think you did that very well. So between you, I think you've really, you know, hopefully left a real impression on everybody of that connection. So and now this time, I will remember you on the end there, Vanessa, and come to you. And we're sort of moving back, I guess, to the law firm environment now. And, you know, you've really led at Linklaters over the year in building an ESG practice. So I'd just like to, as well as maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and but also about that and about the sort of challenges in doing that and, you know, and how you went about it.
So Roger and me are both either very stimulated in our working environment or really unimaginative people, because we've both been in the same organisation for 35 years, though, which may be quite sad.
No.
Though I've retired from the partnership now. So yes, I've been involved with teams who have sequentially created new practices as generally in the sustainability space, and it's always been with other people. So it's not me. It's you know, it's a group of people, because generally if you do things as a group, it's more fun, and then, you know, if one of you is having a bit of a rough time, somebody else can take the slack. So I wanted to talk a little bit about professional services firms, because I'm thinking at the moment about what are the opportunities for professional services firms to engage in this area. And I agree completely with you, Yasmin. Lawyers are critical to delivery of a just transition, and indeed a transition, because climate change is being responded to through policy and regulation, and that is what we do. So it's weird that lawyers have been a little bit reticent until quite recently in engaging in the area, and I wonder if that is and I think I also include other professional services in this. I wonder if that is because our business model is very much focused on distribution of profit in a relatively short-term way. Our organisations are quite vertically structured, and sustainability is by definition cross-cutting. It's a horizontal thing. So you can end up with some quite perverse structures in an organisation that possibly have meant that lawyers have been hesitant to engage in this and could possibly do more. So in developing practices, the principles that I have come across are, well, first of all, spotting change and opportunity is really important. So reading around is valuable. Creating proof of concept and possibly asking for forgiveness rather than permission when you're looking within your own circle. When we were looking at sustainability and ESG, we started, I think, first with a coalition of the willing and lots of people. So we were open source and we talked to everybody, but not everybody listens at the same time. So you have to allow for different practices and offices to respond at different moments with different levels of enthusiasm and not get wound up about it. And then I was blessed with, actually when I was just coming up for election, I was blessed with a wonderful senior partner who did actually understand that environment was relevant. That was a long time ago, so he was definitely ahead of the curve. And then when we were talking about ESG, I was blessed with a managing partner who said to me I wasn't being sufficiently ambitious when I looked at a plan to cascade across the organisation and to train people up. And I think, so tone at the top is super important. Tone at the middle is something you always have to work at. And I think creating circumstances where there are opinion formers who get couples and plaudits and who are brought in, all of those are really important things. So I would encourage people. There's a huge opportunity here, and actually I feel that there is more that professional services could do to bite off people's hands in relation to that opportunity, and to go out and talk to clients about this issue, be a little bit braver and expand outside their practice areas and really embrace it.
Fantastic. Yasmin will never forgive me if I don't ask you, though, what role pro bono has played along the way in building practice.
Pro bono has a really valuable role to play. So it has a utility for a law firm because it's a way of helping people to learn through doing. It has a huge value in its own right, and it has a value in terms of how the people involved, what they get out of it, in terms of, feeling that they're doing something that's worthwhile, as well as the fact that they're upskilling themselves. So you can see a number of different law firms who've developed for example, in relation to human rights, who have managed to build out initially through pro bono and then moving to more engagement with clients in other markets, and you can see a trajectory. But I think also there is an increasing role, and actually CC and Linklaters have worked together on it, in the development of policy as well, which is sort of in that quasi-pro bono area. So we've worked together on the Transition Plan Task Force in the UK, looking at the disclosure framework that's been put out and which will be embedded into regulation. So there are all sorts of ways in which it's hugely important and valuable.
Thanks very much, Vanessa. And actually, you've given me the perfect segue into you, Louis, in talking about policy, because Louis, you've been heavily engaged across the different roles that you've played. I know in as a lawyer, but engaged in policy and also engaged in education. So can I turn to you now and tell us a bit about your background and what you're doing now, and then, as I said, particularly picking up on the sort of role of lawyers in policy, in education, and so forth.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Roger. Perhaps I should begin by saying my name is Louis Franceschi. I'm French by descent, Venezuelan by birth, and Kenyan by choice, and I live in London. So I'm confused. I lived most of my life in Kenya. I'm Kenyan. And I'm the Assistant Secretary General of the Commonwealth of Nations. These are 56 countries, 2.5 billion people, 60% under the age of 30. Fantastic organization. I mean, it's the dream job, if really you ask me where I am now. I lead all the work we do on political affairs, democracy, elections, rule of law, judicial transformation, peace, governance, countering violence and extremism, which are the exciting things, I think, that go on in the Commonwealth. It's interesting. Many times, and this is something that you see it actually materially designed for this COP, you have the green zone and the blue zone, and they don't mix. I mean, it's hell to jump from one zone to the other. And precisely, I always thought and said the idea of having a COP was to bring everyone together. The investors with the government, the people doing business, because let's face it, I see it. Even in government people, I have been meeting presidents one after the other for the first 2 days. Every 15 minutes we had a meeting with a president who wanted something. So, well, I know the solution, but it's Clifford Chance who has it. Can I call them? Can they come quickly? So, and no, they're in a different city because the green zone is a different city. So it's a pity because these meetings really are about putting all the minds together. The environment doesn't know public, doesn't know private. The planet doesn't know the difference. And the solutions we are going to give to certain problems require the input of all these actors. I was telling Roger before that the way I look at it is we have three key issues at play here: law, the lawyer, and the judge. Law is based somehow, it's policy for justice, and that policy requires scientific research. So scientists have to do their work because that will become policy, will feed policy, and policy will feed law. Then the lawyer. The lawyer is so essential because, well, you could say the lawyer is there for profit, for justice, and in this case, profit for the environment. But if you put profit before, then you messed up the whole equation. And this is what we have been doing for too long. And this is what most lawyers do in developing countries and in the first world. Really, sometimes, okay, I'm happy to hear there are some policies that will prevent certain law firms nowadays from going into certain things. But okay, this is a new development somehow. And then the judge. The judge is there for justice. Well, are they really there for justice? How can we prevent them and ring-fence their job so that, well, and that's where separation of powers comes in a very interesting way. In Africa, where I have lived most of my life, we always say that, look, energy transition. Say, what do you mean transition? You transition when you are somewhere and you want to go somewhere else. But this is energy access, because really 80% of the continent is in darkness. So you say, well, it's energy access. And justice transition is justice access. And we have put in place a beautiful initiative with some people of Uganda, Barefoot Law. I think you should Google them. It's amazing. It's the law box. This is a container that is movable. You move it from village to village, and it has Winnie, which is an artificial intelligence program for dispute resolution, takes away the job of many lawyers, sadly. Then we have a virtual court, a magistrate present virtually, and then a mediation center. This has become like the new shopping malls of these villages, and they have two problems. Gerald Avila, the creator, was telling me, we have two big problems. Which ones? One is moving out. They will deflate the tires if we try to move this thing out of the village. Second, storage. Because, of course, this is something done pro bono, and people bring to them maize, goats, cows, chicken. They don't know where to store it. So storage has become an issue. It's very, very interesting, very beautiful what they are doing. But anyway, I would say we are putting in place in the Commonwealth, with the collaboration of many countries and many of your farms, we have a pro bono center we are creating following the model of the New York City Bar Association. It's fantastic and really pro bono, even though the procurement people don't believe. Say, no, you have to procure. No, this is pro bono. They don't believe that. But we are putting in place model contracts, for example. These model contracts on energy, infrastructure, extractives, and we are trying to work with one of your colleagues the possibility of doing one model contract for renegotiation of sovereign debt, commercial sovereign debt. Why? Because many countries do not have that capacity. And then, of course, the multinationals come. I know of a country, name withheld for security reasons, big contract that is actually making that country grow economically in huge leaps and bounds, was negotiated by a divorce lawyer. Then, of course, instead of getting 80% of the profit, they are getting 17%. And on top of that, destroying the environment. So this is not sustainable. Even those lawyers who got that money, they will not get it again because this country will not exist. So we are trying to move along in all this, and building capacity in government is essential. So, gosh, we are trying to find ways. We are writing a curriculum now together with some actors for the training of middle-level officials on how to go about green energy contracts. Because if they don't know it, you see, sometimes we lawyers think that it's just a matter of putting the big farm, the mighty corporation, with the lawyer, and that's it. The government will swallow line, hook, and sinker. But, hey, if the government gentleman or lady or whoever it is, official, does not understand, certainly this will backfire, and then great regrets come later because they don't pay, they change laws, they change presidents, prime ministers, etc. So I think it's an exciting moment we are living. The COP is giving a push to this, but I wish they had brought together closer the green zone and the blue zone.
It's certainly closer this year than it's been in the past. That's certainly true. And actually, I've certainly experienced more of that crossover as a result. So they may have heard you.
Yeah.
We'll move into questions shortly, but there was so much in what you said there, Louis. And actually, one thing I'd just pick up, a couple of things actually. One is that initiative to change government laws. I am aware of that, if it's the same one I'm thinking of, which is an initiative by the Legal Task Force of the Sustainable Markets Initiative.
Yes.
And that's where quite a group of law firms have got together, including Clifford Chance, to look at ways in which the legal community can support the other parts of that initiative, which is basically everybody in the business world. And one of the concrete ideas that we've actually launched here at COP is the training program working with you, working with the Commonwealth to offer that sort of training to upskill governors, because you did give both a fantastic example of where pro bono had worked to where you really wish there had been pro bono. Actually, I can't resist one thing before we move to questions. But people, hopefully you're thinking while I'm talking now of questions. But the Winnie, which I'd not heard that before, it's a fantastic example. But actually, it really ties in a weird way of that access to justice and rule of law is really important within all of this. And I was on a panel just a few weeks back, which Yasmin got me onto, in relation to rule of law. I was very honoured to be on the panel with Baroness Hale, who used to be head of our Supreme Court. And she said her big idea in England was to have a justice bus. Where you would have so we weren't as advanced as you. We weren't thinking about Winnie the computer. We're thinking about having, a magistrate and a recorder, sort of junior judge, who would be on a bus, and they'd go around villages and towns which now no longer have their own courts, and actually dispense civil justice. And this was her big thing. So not just for Kenya, but that idea of getting justice out there and access to justice out there is, a really important one. So hopefully you've had time to think of some questions. Yes. Do you want to say who you are and then ask your question?
Thank you. My name is Hamish Stewart, and thank you for the wonderful and insightful comments. My question, so I do some work convening institutional investors on human mobility and migration policy. And so on the human side, globally, the World Bank estimates that remittances to low and middle income countries are around $840 billion. So it's almost $1 trillion annually in remittances. And so human mobility is clearly essential for development finance, because that $840 billion is triple development aid or foreign direct investment. So what do you think, as lawyers, you can do to improve freedom of movement and mobility to enable more people to move, both in response to climate change, but also just to move generally, to be able to work and send money back? And I think it's a good place to have that discussion, because in the UAE, there's about 9 million people working to make things run here. And clearly, freedom of movement is important. So I'd love to hear your views on what can be done to make it easier for people to move safely across borders for work. Thanks.
Microphone over here. We've got a member of the audience. And then I certainly can add a couple of comments as well. Very good question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for both panels. They're fascinating. I'm Professor Marie-Claire Cordonnier-Seger. You'll hear from me in a second, but I had one question for actually all of you, if it's possible. Something that came up in Climate Law and Governance Day a couple of days ago was this idea of legal leapfrogging. And Professor Luis in particular, the access to justice issues you mentioned are crucial. The access to a world that are facing us right now are also, of course, equally crucial. And I'd love to hear even just one example from each of you of a time when advice to a client you can see has actually helped them to pick a different path just when it was needed. Clients are relationships as well. And sometimes it is that 14 years of advising and then just once being asked just at the right moment and being able to see a real change. And I'd love to hear even just one example.
Ooh, good question. So we'll take those two to start off with then. So I'm happy just to sort of start on your question about that. I think certainly, I'll certainly speak for Clifford Chance. We certainly see asylum and migration issues as one of the key areas that lawyers can offer support. So we actually work, and the way we work in this sector is to work with partner NGOs who are, if you like, on the front line and know what they're doing, in order to and provide our legal support, whether it be directly in relation to their development of policy or law themselves, if they are, if you like, campaigning NGOs, or to help them, if you like, on their back office. It might be their lease, or it may be, an employment issue they've got, to help them, save their money for what they should be spending it on. But a good example of work that we do, which I think very much ties in with your point, is we've worked for many years with a US-based organisation called Asylum Access, and their focus has been absolutely on fighting for the right to work for displaced people. Because as you'll know, in many countries, if you are displaced and you're and you're a different country, you don't have a right to work, you don't have a right to earn, and therefore you're not even on the start of the process you've talked about. So actually fighting for those rights and they tend to be based in different countries around the world, where there is significant migration to that country, and where they've got at least an opportunity to influence policy and to work on those sorts of issues. So I would absolutely say for lawyers that sort of access to justice and human rights there is something that I know that a lot of law firms work on, and certainly something that a lot of our lawyers are very passionate about. But it's not just that big scale. In many of the many of the individual offices will work with local organisations to help with that. There are bigger issues that you've mentioned some of them, but maybe that just gives you a little bit of flavour from my point of view anyway. I don't know whether Charlie or Vanessa, you would want to add anything to that? No?
No, much the same.
Okay. Should we then just sort of think about this second question then from Claire about examples of where the advice, where you were able to give the advice at the right time, or maybe when you got advice, gave advice to your client, your business, which you think was given at the right time as well. So who wants to start, if anybody?
Shall I have a go? So an example was, it's a little while ago, we had a client who had who had a significant product issue which had caused harm, and we talked to them. And in crisis situations, it's quite easy for organisations to get a bit bogged down, and to kind of go a bit like that, become a bit introvert. And so we talked to them about the fact pattern and what the legal analysis was, and then we talked to them about the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and we talked to them about how they might construct a compensation mechanism which was consistent with the UN guiding principles and included engagement with those families who were affected, through which we ended up negotiating a compensation scheme. And it was probably one of the early compensation schemes that had a very significant uptake by the affected class. And it avoided a judicial process, and it also enabled the people involved to have a constructive engagement with the organisation, and also for the organisation to be able to listen to and respond to how they were feeling, because compensation is not necessarily, remedy is not necessarily only about money. It's also about recognition that something has gone wrong that everybody actually would much prefer not to have happened. And it's important to have an opportunity for all the people in the situation to talk about it and acknowledge it. So that's an example.
Thanks, Vanessa. And actually, I pick up on that, because I agree with you. Actually, that the UN guiding principles has been one of the main areas where I've had that experience. Generally, one of the things I've sort of been, if you like, something in my if you like toolbox in talking to a client about an issue where the UN guiding principles are relevant, is just to point out to them that they have actually adopted the UN guided policy and show them the policy on their own website, because quite often, of course, in a large multinational, it's not their issue, if you like, or it's not surprising in a very large organisation. The people I'm speaking to may not have been aware of that, certainly a few years ago, because of course the UN GPs have been around now for a good 12 years. So essentially that's been it all. But I can give you a good news story that over the course of the last few weeks, I've had a conversation with a client about an issue to which they're relevant, and they knew absolutely all about them, and we're talking straight away about the sort of approach, Vanessa, that you've just described. So, we have seen some evolution there in the way clients think about these things. Any more for any more?
Perhaps.
No,
I would simply add that regarding human mobility, the Commonwealth originally was designed or thought out as a free movement of people, goods and services. This somehow got struck by time and by joining the European Union. There were regulations and issues that had to be dealt with. But it's true, we have to resolve that issue. It's very disheartening when countries that were always traditionally so open are closing in on themselves. I think one of the biggest problems we have in the UK now with inflation, etc., it's not COVID or post-COVID, but is Brexit, which stopped the movement of 600,000 people which used to come to work in the UK and then go back to their countries and then back to the UK, etc., etc. And then that created a shortage of people that has not been resolved. And sadly, the policies that have been put in place have not helped. So I think it's one of the things where we have to influence, and businesses have to put that pressure on government to resolve. Because if you don't have the manpower, the economy doesn't grow.
Mahmoud, have you got any examples of where you have helped your clients with advice? So I'm sure that you've got a million, you do it every day.
Actually, yes.
Take an example.
Mainly my clients are internally, starting from the board, from the chairman, from the General Assembly, trying to make a movement to the multinational standards that we need to imply. We can say I cannot say we are forced to do so, but we should. As we are going to multinational, as we are trading with, as I said, 80 countries, so a lot of regulation should be changed and policies should be implemented and put in place. So when we had this partnership with IFC, I remember that we had a long presentation related to the safety tools that we need to implement in our factories, and the budget that was mentioned is $10 million that should be implemented in 2 or 3 years maximum. And we had a great discussion, and I cannot say fight, but it was a discussion trying to convince our internal client, which is the board of directors, that they should invest $10 million for the wealth of people and for the security and the health and safety. And finally, alhamdulillah, we did succeed to do so. This is one of the greatest examples how you should convince your internal people, which is definitely our client at the end, as we are the legal team in cooperation with the HSE team, trying to implement the best and the multinational standards.
What a great example, and again, what was implicit in that, I think, was you being able to present this as being able to get to best in class, to get to the standards that you wanted, that they wanted as a board to see the business have to position itself in the market. So you're using the arguments that will work with that constituency, and I think as lawyers, as trained advocates, that's something that I like to think we're quite good at. More. We've got three in a row
I've got
here.
the microphone. Sorry if that's okay. I'm Sarah Carnegie from the International Bar Association, and I think what's been discussed in a couple of other sessions, but which is possibly missing, is the influence of bars and actually how important they are in this discussion. And what we've found is they can then be educated and upskilled so they can disseminate the knowledge they need for their members. But big law firms need to help influence that in different jurisdictions, because one of the key things that we've been trying to do since being really active in this space as an association is to influence our member bars, of which there are 190, to issue a climate crisis statement as a call to arms for law firms, for lawyers, both in terms of what they do with advising clients and also with how they operate in their own sense. And there have been 8 that have decided to join that cause within the last few years. And that is pretty shameful, given that we're seeing big law firms coming out with this kind of rhetoric and really embracing the change. So I'm keen to know if big law firms, and perhaps even general counsel as well as clients, can start helping to persuade their bars, of which they are members, to engage in this discussion and then help upskill millions of lawyers rather than just selected firms.
We'll take the second question. Thank you. We'll take this second question and then deal with them together.
Good evening. I'm Justice Jawad Hassan from Pakistan. I just came, and my question is that we are very quite grateful to Yasmin for 848 when we were apart with London Commercial Courts. My question is, having being the same background as a corporate lawyer, now I'm a judge for the last 10 years, what is the steps looking at the legal anthropology the whole world is taken to train the judiciary, commercial courts, the arbitration forums, and then last forum is the regulators. Because now, as the climate change issue was debated, started with the South and North, and North and South had the divide.
Yeah.
South countries in the 90s, India and Pakistan, gave judgments on environmental justice, and the first judgment was given by us, our court, is as a Ghari judgment, which 2018. Now that it has now effect in the North too. The issue you can relate to UK courts, the Dutch courts, then the German courts, the Brazilian courts, the Colombian courts, and another one, Ecuador, the issue of the mining issue in Ecuador. The arbitration forum gave the award, but what happened to the people living in that area in Ecuador? So all these lessons learned, my only question is, what steps are this whole community is taking for regulators also? They're very important also, SCCP, Security and Exchange Commission, the state banks, and those are the most important pillars to focus on.
So is your question specifically about what more can be done with regulators then? Okay. So the first question, I'm happy to. I'll say something about it first, and then I'll pass over to you. So what I say is, first, I do think that law firm members of bar associations clearly have a big role to play in, if you like, joining and, if you like, putting time and effort into the development of policy, and also in particular, I think there's a fantastic role played by law firms working with bar associations in terms of helping in the design of policy, in particular commenting upon specific pieces of legislation, and I actually chair the relatively new ESG committee of the City of London Law Society, and actually that plays a really great role, I think, in picking up proposed legislation and actually not just legislation, but new regulations from regulators, going back to your question as well, and giving suggestions and comments or critique in relation to how those new proposed codes, such as the new code. One of the ones we were looking at is the proposed regulation of ESG rating agencies and new codes around that, because lawyers actually we know about, you know, policy and regulation, world law, that sort of side, but certainly as commercial lawyers, we also know how that actually works in real life for clients and for business. So I think we play a really important role there. I have to say that in relation to your question about signing statements and things like that, that's a more difficult one. So I'm on our responsible business board, in fact, alongside Jeroen, who chairs that, which is our, you know, a body that looks at our own responsible business. And one of the things that we do there is consider whether we should or should not sign up to the, can I put it this way, myriad of different things we're asked to sign across the whole board. And our issue really is that, you know, we need to be consistent about what we sign, what we're promising the outside world, and whether we're capable of monitoring it and actually delivering on it. So actually, although, you know, the underlying issues here may be ones that we're passionate about, but say with climate change, we have committed to the principles of the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance. We've signed up to that. And we've also had our own climate change policies accredited by the SBTI. We do those things. Now, actually, I'm resistant to signing anything else or making any other pledges about climate change and what we propose to do, because they are either repetitive or they cut across what I think we've already, well, not I think, I know we've committed to. So I think that is an issue when we are everyday approach, can the firm now sign this letter and that commitment? So I think that's an issue. Oh, okay.
All their lawyer members, because I know exactly what these big law firms have signed up, which is fantastic, but it's not about another thing that you have to sign. It's about, in different jurisdictions, persuasive and positive action to assist bars with the decision for them to disseminate knowledge and resolution to their members, like the Law Society of England and Wales, like the Brazilian bar very recently. So there are some moving, but many are not. That was the lobbying point. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. Does anybody else want to say anything about this question? Oh, I'm being told that we are at time. So, for this panel, sorry?
It's fine.
Okay, no, I've got this sign coming to me. So I think we better keep to time. So it remains for me to thank my fantastic panel, and can we just do that in the... Well, I don't think we can take any more questions.
No, it's not a question. It's not actually a question.
I'm now being given permission to take your question.
Okay, so, thank you. So it's not actually a question, it's a comment.
All right,
it's a question somewhere along the line, but it's more of a comment. I heard Yasmin and Tanya, and I could relate, they mentioned, like, my name is Dela. I come from Ghana. I'm a lawyer in Ghana. And they talked about some of the developing countries, the issues. And then I heard Professor Louis, and I could really relate. He lives in Kenya, I live in Ghana. And he talked about the green zone and the blue zone meeting more. So these are countries where when you look at the SDGs, I mean, you know, you talk about no poverty, you talk about sustainable, and you talk about all kinds of stuff. These are countries where access to sometimes even clean water is an issue. Access to food can sometimes be an issue. Electricity or power is an issue. And so my comment is, how can we bring developing countries along by, how can we support lawyers? I don't know whether this question can be answered here right now. How can we support lawyers like us or like me in developing countries to influence policy more? Because you have governments that don't get it. It's all about profit, really. How do you influence parliament, government, to ensure that we come along? Because you know what? No matter how many people we have who do not have access to the basic necessities in life, the climate is not waiting. The climate crisis is not waiting for us to come along and get it. I'm a tree hugger. I'm always saying save the trees because I have that exposure. But how many people, what is the percentage of people that live in my country, truthfully speaking, who have the same exposure? So we as lawyers in these countries, how can we be supported? I was so excited to hear about carbon receipts. At least we have the landmass. So if we have the support, we can make sure that our green zones in terms of trees are maintained so people don't go cutting trees. I hate when I see people cutting trees. And so I like places like some of the universities have policies that you cannot cut a tree without getting permission all the way from the top. So, I'm just saying, so that the two meet, because the climate crisis is not going anywhere if we don't do something about it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you. Well, I'll just say two very quick things, because I guess we are going, because I would say two. One is definitely to be speaking with Yasmin about the support A4ID can give. We do have a presence now in Kenya, sadly not in Ghana, but in Kenya, where we're focusing on working with lawyers in Africa to build exactly what you're saying, and that sort of capacity and that support. So that's one thing. And then second, actually, we would like to speak to the lady to your right here, because again, it is about the institutions that lawyers can work through in countries, and bar associations certainly, I'm very clear on that, can very much play that role. Because as I said, certainly in, say, a jurisdiction like England and Wales, lawyers do get this opportunity. We have the time and the resource and support for us to spend time interacting with government, looking at policy, providing comments and stuff, and giving our time to do that. I know how difficult that is for a lawyer working often in a different environment without the resources of firms that we have to have the ability to do that. We've done quite a lot of training in Kenya actually, and Rwanda and others on business and human rights for lawyers there. And so I've heard it again and again about that resource constraint, and even within then the private practice lawyers, and then lawyers being able to work with their local bar associations. So I think those are some perhaps things you can help drive forward, but hopefully there's people that can help as well. So I will now ask you all to thank my panel in the usual way. And then I think finally, I'll now hand back to Yasmin.
So then it is with great pleasure that I invite Professor Marie-Claire Cordonnier-Seger, who is the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP28, and of Climate Law and Governance Initiative, to give her closing remarks.
Thank you. I will stay brief. It's been a long day, some incredible conversations, fascinating initiatives. What brought me here as Senior Director of a Center for International Sustainable Development Law, and as the first chair in Sustainable Development Law and Policy in the University of Cambridge, and a woman, started many years ago. And when I was 17, and traveled by land from Canada down to Chile and then up to Brazil for the Rio Earth Summit, where we agreed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And we raised concerns about the logging of the British Columbia temperate rainforests, as well as the Amazon and all over the world. And today those forests that we saved are burning. They're burning in Canada, where I'm from. They're burning in Ghana. They're burning in so many places. I'd like to start with just a quick thanks to all of the lawyers that have spoken today and that are here in this room. David Attenborough said recently, there are few things in the world that are more important than what you do here today. And I think that's an appropriate way to start this closing. 169 out of 186 nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Yeah, I'm still here. 25 years later, 28 years later. 169 of them require legal and institutional change to be implemented in their countries. We need you so badly. The Climate Law and Governance Initiative, which is a partnership of hundreds of general counsels and negotiators and practitioners and professors and lots of incredible law students. We had over 2,000 of them online and with us in the room, Climate Law and Governance Day here at the COP. We agreed on 4 themes for SDG 13, climate action, bringing in SDG 7, clean energy transition, SDG 16, justice. We were looking at operationalizing the Paris Agreement in international law, contributing to the global stocktake, market and non-market approaches, transparency, technology frameworks, financial capacity, compliance, loss and damage mechanisms, also synergies with other international legal instruments, and that's just at the global level. We were looking at the national regulations that are needed. We were looking at testing legal and governance tools for high ambition implementation across instruments for mitigation, adaptation, resilience, finance, creating synergies within and across sectors, as you've spoken about today, my colleague. Assessing legal barriers and strengthening capacity among law and policy leaders and judges. For high ambition NDC implementation, we need it across all sectors, energy, agriculture, tax lawyers to help us design a proper carbon tax that works. We looked at advancing climate resilience and justice, engaging civil society and the legal community in access to justice, including courts, bar associations, and others to accelerate climate action on the ground, ensure transparency and accountability, and rights-based approaches to climate change action. And we looked at net zero legal frameworks to enable climate neutral investment and finance. For our commercial lawyers in the group, there's so much that you are already doing, and there's so much that is more needed. So I would conclude with just maybe a welcome. We are so glad you're here. These international obligations, and they relate not just to the Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate action, they relate to all of the SDGs. They're surrounded by binding international treaties that we have had a lot of trouble complying with and implementing. And I think that's partly because law hasn't always been on the side of the angels in this one, especially for climate change. There's a lot we could do to foster rather than frustrate. Sustainable Development Goal 13 and the Paris Agreement and all of the other SDGs, food, water, energy, biodiversity, stop my burning forests. Having sat on logging blockades when I was 14, trying to stop the machines from going in. Having hunger striked when I was 18 for 26 days to convince our government to change the rules. They did. It's so frustrating to watch them burn. And I think everyone will have a story like that soon. I heard from one of the chief counsel of the World Bank, who's from Kenya, the river that his village depends on is dried up. Can't go home. I think everyone is going to have a story like that. So I would like to say welcome. I welcome especially this initiative, the SDGs Legal Initiative. It's so needed. The partnership, the service that is being created and continued today. I welcome the analysis, the advice, and the action in countries that you can all bring. Not just you, but your networks. The 23,000 lawyers that the Brazilian Bar Association brought together in a conference to prepare for this. And that's what we need. I would like to especially welcome, as Jasmine began and Vanessa raised just now as well, this opportunity here for insight, for inspiration, and for impact, because I am confident that just in time, you will seize the day. Thank you.
Okay, we're almost at the end of the session now, and I'm sure you agree we've had some excellent panelists who have spoken eloquently about just transition and what it means for the legal community, the role of the law and the role of the lawyer. I'm sure you agree that both panels have addressed their questions exceptionally well and have provided us with much food for thought. Can we then acknowledge their contributions in the traditional way? I'd also like to recognise the contribution of the chairs of the panel, both Munir Hassan and Roger Lees, for their excellent chairing by teasing out the relevant issues. So a big thank you to you. And I thank you, Professor Marie-Claire Condonier-Seger, for sharing your thoughts in your closing remarks. Now, we encourage you to ensure that these discussions continue beyond today and beyond COP28. We hope the ideas that have been discussed turn into palpable action as we collectively seek to accelerate progress under Paris, all the while ensuring that we move with caution in the way that is assuredly just. As we know, action can come in many forms. If you're a private sector law firm, it can mean upskilling your staff and taking a climate-conscious approach to legal problem solving. For many of you, it won't be long, if it hasn't happened already, that clients approach you for climate-sensitive advice on a whole range of issues, such as due diligence practices, risk management strategies, and the ever-increasing risk of climate liability. This means being consistently and meaningfully engaged on topics such as just transition and on the best practice within the industry. Staying one step ahead of the game can offer huge advantages through thought leadership, setting trends across the industry, encouraging voluntary assessment of climate risks and impacts, and through working alongside regulations to promote consistency and the rule of law. If you're an individual working in law reform or government policy, action can also take on many guises, from designing policies that achieve the outcome of climate neutrality to promoting systemic change through embedding green processes and decision-making across sectors. Your work may involve developing innovative regulatory frameworks and best practice across industries. It involves working in partnership with the private sector to better understand the practical dimensions of building new renewable energy solutions. And even at an international level, laws and policies have much to gain from intergovernmental and cross-border support. Forming long-term partnerships on these global issues can help to overcome any fiscal constraints or capacity shortages you or others may be facing in meeting climate goals and ambitions. If you are unsure about how best to act or would like to enhance your impact, A4ID's pro bono broker work offers an opportunity to identify direct need and targeted support on climate action in countries across the globe. The SDG Legal Initiative also offers a unique space to exchange these ideas and provides many opportunities for collective action. Our online hub offers a chance to let others know what you're doing and learn from their examples, in turn inspiring new ways to get involved. Our online resources, such as our SDG legal guides, provide free and accessible best practice toolkits and educational resources to the global legal community on what each of the sustainable goals are and the specific ways which international and national legal frameworks relate to sustainability of those objectives. As the first resource of its kind, the SDG Legal Initiative Guides offer a valuable insight into the UN SDG agenda and its relationship with the legal sector. So I encourage you to take a look at them via our SDG Legal Initiative platform, included in our dedicated chapters on climate action. For more tailored, targeted and bespoke support, A4ID's annual Law and Development Training Programme also offers a chance for a more structured learning on how the law can be furthered under the SDG agenda. Finally, I'd like to take a moment to express my gratitude to CMS, Clifford Chance, Kirkland Ellis and Linklaters for joining forces with A4ID to put together this event. A special mention to Guy Pendle, Jackie Haberfield and Matt Sparks, who are unfortunately not able to be with us here in person, but who've worked with us to make this happen. And I'd also like to thank you, Jenny Hallett, for your tireless support in organising this event. And also, I, of course, thank my wonderful team at A4ID. I thank you all for your participation here today and for generally being quite wonderful. Thank you to those of you who've joined online and those of you who are here in person. And I invite those of you who are here to join us in networking and continuing these discussions over a glass or two of wine. Before we formally close today's programme, I would like you to leave your feedback. For those online, please use the link, and for those in the room, please use the scan QR code which is up there. It is important for us so that we can learn and improve. It will only take a very few minutes of your time. So finally, I'd like to leave you with the UN Secretary General's poignant yet optimistic comment that the climate emergency is a race we are losing, but it's a race we can win. With lawyers as pathfinders and with the UN Sustainable Goals as our compass, we still stand a chance of achieving a just energy transition. Thank you.